Dad will give me half of your pension, right? My son said, his voice calm as if splitting a dinner bill. In front of me was the wooden table I had built with my own hands, the place where he once blew out his 8th birthday candles. Now, in that same spot, he looked at me, not with the eyes of a son, but with the gaze of a landlord demanding rent in the very house I had paid for entirely in cash. In that moment, I understood. To him, I was no longer a father. I was an income source, a figure in the family spreadsheet I had created myself. People think betrayal comes from strangers, but no, the cruelest betrayal always comes from the one who once called you father. This is not a story about money. This is a story about silent justice, the kind that can shatter greed without raising a single voice. If you have ever been looked down upon by your own family, ever been seen as a burden in your own home, stay with me. I am truly grateful that you are listening. Please hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share the city you're listening from, because maybe, right where you live, another father is walking silently through the same kind of pain. They say spring in Eugene always smells of damp wood and freshly roasted coffee. That day, sunlight slipped through the window of 742 Willamette Drive, landing on the oak table where my son Andrew, his wife Paige, and I were having lunch. I had just refilled my cup when I noticed my hand trembling slightly, perhaps from age, or perhaps because of what I was about to say. "I want you two to know first," I began, trying to keep my voice even. "Next month I'm officially retiring. After 43 years in bridge engineering, it's finally time." I smiled. "My pension will be around $2,800 a month. Not much, but enough for a simple life." Andrew nodded with a flicker in his eyes I couldn't quite catch. Paige set her fork down, the motion too graceful, as if rehearsed. "What a coincidence," she said, her tone as flat as someone reading a contract. "Because starting in April, you'll begin paying rent." I thought I misheard. "Rent?" Paige nodded. $1,400 a month. It covers room, electricity, water, internet, and kitchen use. I prepared a breakdown so you can follow easily. A printed sheet slid across the table, columns neatly labeled. Room rental, utilities allocation, food costs. I looked at the bottom line. Total $1,400, tidy as a restaurant bill. Andrew stayed silent, staring at his plate, words lining up in his mind. I waited. "You know, Dad," he finally said, "expenses are high these days. House, taxes, insurance. I think everyone should contribute." I leaned back, feeling the floor tilt beneath me. "Contribute," I repeated. "In the house your mother and I bought outright in 2011. Paige lifted her chin, her eyes sharp and cold. "But the name on the deed is Andrew's. This is our house, and everywhere. It's simple. If you stay, you pay." The metal watch on his wrist caught the light, the same one I'd given him at graduation. I remembered saying, "Keep it, to remind you that time never comes back." Now it seemed like a gleam felt like mockery. The air grew thick. I tried to swallow a sip of coffee, but the bitterness wasn't in the cup. "Interesting," I murmured, barely audible. "Very interesting indeed." Paige nodded slightly as if the negotiation had ended smoothly. "So we're agreed. First payment April 1st. 3 weeks." I stood. No slamming, no shouting. The chair scraped dryly against the floor. Andrew didn't look up. Paige's faint smile told me all I needed to know. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. I walked toward the stairs, light glancing off the wooden steps I had once polished by hand. When I reached the 3rd step, Paige's voice floated up, soft and casual. "Oh, and if it's late, we'll add a 2% penalty." I stopped midway. I didn't turn. I just heard the ticking of Andrew's watch, steady, relentless, counting down to something breaking. My room upstairs faced the tall pines across the street. Sunlight slipped through the blinds onto an old photograph. Lydia, my late wife, smiling, holding the new house keys the day we bought this place. I sat on the bed in silence. The box on the dresser still sat there, labeled in my handwriting, House 2011. I opened it. The papers inside were flat, smelling of old paper and pine. On top was a cashier's check for $330,000, dated March 5th, 2011. Buyer, Martin Keller. Payee, Willamette Title Company. Signed, me. Beneath it lay the closing statement, a photocopy of the deed, and a yellowed note. For Andrew's start, not his ownership. I smiled faintly. Perhaps at Lydia, perhaps at myself. The man who calculated every bolt on every bridge but misjudged the true load of trust. From below came laughter. Andrew and Paige's voices, glasses clinking. I listened, trying to decode the tone. But after decades of hearing metal groan before collapse, I knew that sound. It wasn't joy. It was a structure under strain. I closed the box and placed it on the desk. Not hidden, not locked. Right in the open, a reminder that justice also needs light. Then I opened the drawer, took out my worn leather notebook and an old company pen, and wrote the first line. March 10th. Andrew and Paige demanded $1,400 monthly from my $2,800 pension. Called it market rate, fair share. Each letter is neat and straight, like my first blueprints. I paused, staring at the line. Small, yet heavier than any bridge I ever built. I stepped onto the balcony. The Eugene sky was pale blue, clouds drifting past the distant cascades. I breathed in the scent of wet earth and faint metal, the freight train crossing the Willamette Bridge. After years in engineering, I had learned one thing. Every structure has a limit. Today, I've just found mine as a father. When I returned to the desk, sunset brushed the curtain's edge. I opened the box again, took out the check, and laid it beside the notebook. 2 pieces of paper, one past, one present, rested like twin steel beams awaiting their test. I added one more line. In April, they'll demand money. That day, I'll give them something else. From the living room, the clock ticked. I heard each beat, steady, cold, the sound of time measuring the collapse of a home. And I knew that when I rose from that lunch table today, everything had changed. My life had entered the final phase of the work I knew best, inspecting the structure before it fails. When people say memories fade with time, they've never kept a house long enough. Because bricks, wood, and light all know how to store the stories people try to forget. The next morning, I woke early. Rain whispered on the roof tiles, and water trickling down the gutters sounded like a pen tracing an old line of ink. I brewed coffee, sat by the table, and opened the same paper box from the night before. Inside, among the documents, was a faded photograph. Lydia and I standing in front of the Willamette Title Company sign. Sunlight glinting off the old Ford behind us. She was smiling, holding a key ring, and I, in my worksite jacket, still couldn't believe I was about to do the greatest thing of my life, buy a home for my family. 14 years ago, Eugene was different. The Willamette ran clearer. The Ferry Street Bridge hadn't needed its second repair. I had just been promoted to lead bridge engineer, and the Interstate 5 project was finally completed. Lydia was a literature teacher at Roosevelt High School. Every evening she read her students' essays while I drafted bridge plans on the dining table. The day Lydia spoke about the house, her voice was as soft as the rain beyond the window. "Have you ever thought about where we'll grow old?" she asked. I half joked, "As long as there's you and morning coffee, anywhere is fine." She smiled. "Then let's find a place close enough to hear the train cross the bridge, but far enough for our child to have his own sky." 3 months later, we found the house on Willamette Drive. 1.5 stories, oak floors, a wide porch facing the pines. Price, $330,000. Lydia calculated carefully, and I quietly signed the check with a trembling hand. When the title officer asked, "Would you like your son listed as co-owner?" I shook my head. "Just put his name there. He deserves a better start than I had." Lydia looked at me without a word, just squeezed my hand. That afternoon, as we turned the key in the lock for the first time, Lydia said something that still echoes in my head like metal striking steel. Help, your child, but don't forget to keep a roof for yourself. I laughed, thinking she was worrying too much. But now, every time I remember, I understand. She wasn't talking about wood and bricks. She meant the boundary of love. I placed the photo back in the box and pulled out the second folder. The old printed text was fading, but the numbers were clear. 330,000. Beside it were 10 years of property tax receipts, all in my name, each note scribbled in pencil. Paid by Dad, annual. When Lydia passed in 2018, I kept this house as I kept the last piece of her. Andrew had just married. I still recall the morning he and Paige moved in. She brought potted plants and boxes of scented candles, saying she wanted to give the house new life. I believed her. I thought having young people around would bring warmth, something that Lydia would have liked. I didn't realize those plants would wither before I noticed I'd become a guest in my own home. I held the old yellow note, my handwriting from 14 years ago, for Andrew's start, not his ownership. I read it again and again. The ink had faded, but its meaning had never been clearer. I took my pen and added beneath it, he mistook the start for the destination. The coffee had gone cold. I carried the cup to the porch, where Lydia once taught her students over Zoom during the pandemic. The railing still bore a tiny burn mark from her incense sticks. I touched it. The rain had stopped. Clouds parted to reveal a pale midday sun. From a distance I heard Andrew on the phone. His voice was low and quick, the way someone speaks when choosing words carefully to avoid being overheard. Tell them I'll transfer on time. Yes, yes. Just 3 more weeks. A pause. My dad. Don't worry, he'll cover his part. His part. I closed my eyes. Lydia once said there are words you should never use with family. His part was one of them. I went inside, opened the desk drawer, and took out my old Lane County project files, records from my bridge work. On every first page there was the line, calculated load capacity, the strength of beams, of bridges, of concrete. But there was never a formula for the strength of trust. I wrote in my journal, March 11th, heard Andrew on the phone, large payment pending, reason unclear, need to verify. Then I added another line. Lydia said, don't forget your own roof. When I finished, I heard the wind slip through the doorframe, carrying the scent of pine and damp soil. For a moment, I thought I heard Lydia whisper, Martin, bridges only collapse when people stop checking them. I closed the notebook and looked up. On the wall, Andrew and Paige's wedding photo hung slightly crooked. I walked over and straightened it. The glass reflected my face. Older, quieter, but clearer than ever. Lydia used to say every house has its own soul. I believe that. And if it's true, this house must be trembling under betrayal. I set the photo straight and looked around. Everything was silent, yet I knew the walls were waiting for me to act, like steel beams waiting for the final stress test. Tomorrow, I will go to the bank. It was time to review what I once thought was unbreakable. I looked out the window where the pines swayed under a shaft of light breaking through the clouds. I spoke softly, as if to Lydia. I promise, this time I'll keep the roof for myself. Monday morning, Eugene was covered in a thin layer of mist, like the last breath of the night still lingering. I sat at the dining table watching dim light filter through the curtains, mixing with the scent of freshly brewed black coffee. On the table, my leather-bound notebook lay open. I wrote the new date in bold, March 12th. Beneath it, I left 2 empty lines. I knew today would bring something worth recording. Paige came down first, her hair tied up neatly, her shirt crisp, her perfume carrying a trace of cool mint. She opened a cabinet and placed a new stack of papers on the table. Martin, I've rewritten the house rules. Everything's clear for everyone, she said, stressing the word everyone, like a manager addressing her staff. I lifted the page. House rules, updated March 12th. Quiet hours, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Kitchen access, Page mornings, Martin after 8:30. Thermostat, 60 degrees Fahrenheit max during daytime. I folded the page and slipped it into my pocket. Clarity is good, I said. Every bridge needs a load limit, doesn't it? Paige frowned slightly, perhaps not realizing it was a metaphor. When she left for work, I opened the notebook and wrote, House rules posted. Paige drafted a document, tone managerial. Andrew came down later. His shirt was wrinkled, and coffee was hastily poured. He avoided my gaze. Dad, I'll be home late tonight. Work stuff, I asked. Everything all right? He hesitated. Yeah, just busy. I nodded, watching him leave. I didn't believe him, but I wrote, Andrew leaving early, possibly avoiding conversation. The house was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking, the steady rhythm of something under strain. My eyes landed on the corner of the stairwell, where a faint red light blinked. I stood up and walked closer. It was a small camera, cleverly fixed between two wooden beams. I touched it. The red light went out. When I pulled it down, I saw the cheap brand, one of those sold for pet monitoring. There were no pets in this house. I noted, small camera found in hallway, red light blinking, removed at 10:42 a.m. Then I took a photo, saved it to my phone, and uploaded a copy to a private drive that only I knew the password to. I had once learned to listen for the sound of metal cracking. It always warned of collapse. Now I heard the same thing here. Only this time it wasn't steel breaking. It was kinship. In the afternoon, I walked to the First Oregon Bank, a small branch 3 blocks away. The teller recognized me and smiled. Mr. Keller, what can I help you with today? I need to open a new account, I said. Checking and savings. She typed a few keys. May I ask why? I just want to simplify finances before retirement. Of course, she smiled. Funds hold 2 business days, then your new debit card will arrive. I signed the papers and transferred $89,000 from the old account, the one Andrew knew about, to the new one. When done, I rented a small safety deposit box, keeping the key in my wallet. On the way home, light rain fell, and the scent of wet timber from a nearby workshop drifted out, familiar as the construction sites of my past. Lydia once said, Rain smells like time washing away what's false. I thought maybe this rain would wash away excuses, too. That evening, I ate alone. Andrew didn't return. Paige texted briefly, Work late. Don't wait up. I set the phone down and wrote, both absent at dinner. Behavior distant, calculated. I poured another cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch. The night was thick, the streetlight casting a faint yellow glow across the wet yard. Under the eaves, water dripped steadily, the rhythm I'd heard thousands of times on job sites. Each drop hit the ground, splashing small bubbles. A simple structure, but logical. Water always finds the weakest point first. I went back inside and plugged in my phone. Instead of sleeping, I opened my computer and created a new folder. Evidence, Maple Project. I photographed everything. The house rules, the camera, the document box, the house check, and time-stamped them all. Finally, I added, backup at 10:17 p.m. SHA verified. When I turned off the light, a faint sound came from downstairs. A heavy thud, maybe a cabinet door. I opened my room door and looked down the stairs. Paige stood in the kitchen, refrigerator open, white light shining on her expressionless face. She was photographing the shelves and containers inside. Just taking inventory, she said when she noticed me. Seeing who uses what. Transparency, that's all. Of course, I replied. But remember to record trust. It just went missing. She said nothing, put away her phone, and walked upstairs. As she passed, the scent of mint mixed with the chill of the night, making it hard to breathe. I wrote, "Page is photographing fridge contents. Time 11:42 p.m. Possible inventory control." Before bed, I opened the paper box once more. My fingers touched the photo of Lydia holding the house keys. I whispered, "I'm inspecting the bridge, my love." The red light from the removed camera lay dim in the drawer. Outside, the rain had stopped. The house was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet. It was the stillness of concrete before it cracks. I placed the notebook on the desk, the pen still warm. On the page, small, neat lines ran, evenly like a heartbeat. I knew I had started a new project, not a bridge, not a construction site, but a stress test of the human heart. Before turning off the lamp, I added one last line for the day. "Tomorrow, review public records, Lane County Clerk, look for any liens or loans." Then I closed the book. The porch light cast a long golden stripe across the table, right between the paper box and the photograph. There, between light and shadow, I saw clearly the road ahead, the one I would not let anyone else name again. 3 days later, I was in downtown Eugene, where new glass buildings rose from old concrete foundations. This city had once been an open blueprint. Every bridge and road I'd ever worked on existed somewhere in its memory. I passed the old Public Works building. 10 years ago, my hard hat still hung on its door. Now, in my hand was a thick file bound with rubber bands and a business card that read, "Samuel Reed, attorney at law." I walked into his office at 10 in the morning. The air smelled of oak and pine resin. Technical drawings of steel bridge frames hung alongside framed law degrees. A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and glasses stood behind his desk. "Mr. Keller?" "Yes." "Samuel Reed. Call me Sam. I used to be an engineer before switching careers." I shook his hand, firm, deliberate, the kind of handshake from someone who understood the weight of words. He gestured for me to sit. "Now," he said, "tell me everything from the start. Don't skip a single detail." I opened the file box. Every document, copy, and receipt was arranged in order, like a project plan. A cashier's check for $330,000. The closing statement, 10 years of property tax records, photos of the house, Lydia's handwritten note. Reed turned each page, his eyes slow but precise. "No mortgage?" he asked. "None. I paid in full, cash. Put my son's name on it so he could start building credit." "And now you're living with them?" "Temporarily, until being called a tenant becomes too much." Reed scribbled notes. "Oregon recognizes constructive trust. If person A pays for the property but person B holds the title, the court can declare A the equitable owner. The challenge is proving it." I nodded. "I have the check, the bank records, and the tax log. I kept everything." "Any witnesses besides you?" "Neighbor, Ruth Delaney. She saw me move in from day one." "Good." Reed smiled faintly. "You have what we call a chain of evidence. I'll need certified copies of all this." He carefully lifted the yellow note bearing the words, "For Andrew's start, not his ownership." "Is this your handwriting?" "Yes. I wrote it the day we signed." "Perfect," he murmured, almost impressed. "That single line could hold up the whole case." He opened a drawer, took out a small black notebook, and sketched something. I recognized the shape, a bridge frame, twin beams joined by cross points. "Know why I love real estate law?" he asked. I'd guess because it has structure. "Exactly. Every dispute is a bridge. Miscalculate one stress point and it collapses. You're an engineer, I'm a lawyer. We work in the same trade, just with different materials." His words made me laugh for the first time in weeks. Reed chuckled too, then closed his notebook. "All right, I'll send a title verification letter and start the draft for a constructive trust filing. But this will take time, 4 to 6 months, maybe longer." "I have time." "And fees?" "I need the number." "Retainer 8,500. Altogether around 18 to 20,000 if it drags. I don't pad estimates. I pulled out the new checkbook from my bank, wrote the amount, signed steady hand. He accepted the check and placed it gently on his desk, like handling a fine piece of steel. Thank you. I'll send the retainer agreement and draft petition within 2 days. Before leaving, I looked around. In the corner hung a graphite bridge sketch labeled faintly, Load Distribution Analysis, S. Reed, 1992. I asked, You actually built one? Yes, he said. A small bridge in Salem. Miscalculated one factor, spent a month fixing it. Learned then that what fails isn't the material, it's the assumption. I nodded. Seems we're both about to relearn that. When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The wet pavement reflected city light like polished metal. I paused, gazing toward the distant Spencer Butte hills. Lydia once told me, If you ever find yourself cornered, remember, the strongest bridges are the ones tested by storms. I opened my phone and checked my drive. The Maple Project folder now had a subfolder, Read Legal. I added a note. Retained Counsel 0315, Constructive Trust, Lane County Circuit Court. On the way home, I stopped by a small cafe near the university. Sitting by the window, I watched students pass, young men like Andrew, laughing, unaware that one misplaced signature could tilt an entire life off course. I opened my notebook and wrote, March 15th, met attorney Reed. Plan, verify title, prepare lawsuit. He understands bridges. I understand collapse. When I got home, Andrew's car was already in the driveway. He was on the phone, voice low and urgent. No, just a few more weeks. My dad's about to retire. Yeah, $2,800 a month. Half's enough. I stood under the porch shadows, hearing every word. When he hung up, I stepped forward. The porch light fell across his face. Financial trouble, Andrew? He startled, then looked away. No, just work stuff. I hope so. I walked inside and closed the door. My heart beat steadily, but cold as metal. I knew I hadn't misheard. That night I placed the paper box on the desk beside the notebook and Lydia's photo. Under the warm light, the three objects formed a row, like a bridge diagram. Past, present, justice. I wrote the final line of the day. Tomorrow, confirm title with county recorder. Lydia was right. The storm is coming. Then I turned off the light. Outside, the wind through the pines sounded exactly like a bridge under pressure. I listened calmly, as someone who had once measured every tremor. I knew I had entered the first stage of a battle. Not one fought with shouting, but with documents, data, and an old man who still believed in the load-bearing strength of truth. I have always believed that when people try to deceive, they leave traces in numbers, because no matter how polished the data looks, it always finds a way to tell the truth. On Thursday morning, when I came downstairs, the air smelled of cold food and fresh printer ink. On the dining table lay another stack of papers, perfectly aligned like an accountant's report. Paige sat at the head of the table, laptop open, highlighter in hand. Andrew stood beside her, arms crossed, avoiding my eyes. Dad, Paige said, her tone soft, almost diplomatic. We reviewed this month's expenses and made a few adjustments. She pushed the papers toward me. I looked down. The final bold number read, $1,700. You raised the rent? I asked, my voice steady. Paige nodded. Market rates here went up. The house across the street rents a room for $1,650 without utilities. You're still getting a good deal. Andrew added, awkwardly, Paige just wants it to be fair, Dad. We're paying mortgage, insurance, taxes. Mortgage? I looked up. I thought this house was paid off 14 years ago. Andrew's lips pressed tight. I set the printout down, smoothing its edge. You two did your homework, I said. Expenses, columns, comparisons, market rate and all. Looks like a financial report. Paige smiled faintly, confident. You're an engineer, Dad. You know everything needs structure. The house is no different. I folded the page and slipped it into my pocket. I know structure, I said. And I know load capacity. Anything over its limit breaks. Paige tilted her head. What do you mean by that? I'm talking about bridges, not people. I poured another cup of coffee and stopped looking at them. When they left the house, I wrote the line. March 16th. Paige raised rent from $1,400 to $1,700. Reason, market rate. The word mortgage was mentioned for the first time. Need to verify. That afternoon, I walked to the Lane County Recorder's office. The room smelled of old paper and ink. I filled out a form requesting the property title and transaction history. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with glasses, glanced at the address and said, "Give me a moment." She returned 5 minutes later, laying 3 pages on the counter. "Here's the latest record." I thanked her, stepped into the hallway, and opened it. My eyes stopped at the second line. Home equity line of credit, Pacific Northwest Bank, $95,000, February 2023. A mortgage loan, not mine, no signature of mine. I sat on the bench in the corridor. Students passed by, laughing, their shoes echoing on the tiled floor. I stared at that line for a long time. It felt like seeing the first crack on a steel beam. Andrew had mortgaged the house. They borrowed $95,000. Why? I didn't have to guess long. I opened my phone and typed a note. Mortgage mentioned. Verified. HELOC recorded Feb 2023. No signature mine. Possible motive, rent as repayment source. That evening, when I returned home, Andrew was watching the news, Paige typing on her laptop. They both looked up as I entered. "I was at the county recorder's office," I said evenly. "There's a $95,000 loan secured by this house. Now I understand why you needed half my pension." Paige froze. Andrew stood, trying to sound calm. "Dad, you don't understand. I understand more than you think," I interrupted. "I used to calculate suspension loads. I know when a structure's about to fail. And you're adding stress to one that's already cracked." Paige cut in. "That's our business. You're just staying here temporarily." I looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "And you just confirmed what I needed." I went upstairs without another word. In my room, I opened the paper box, took out the cashier's check for $330,000, photographed it, and emailed it to Reed with a short note. Mortgage detected. Loan unauthorized. Request legal action. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Reed's voice came through steady and firm. "Mr. Keller, you just gave me the keystone of this bridge. This proves they used property not legally theirs to secure credit. I'll file within 48 hours. Prepare your sworn statement." "I'm ready," I said. "And Martin," Reed added, slower now, "don't confront them directly anymore. Desperate people are dangerous." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "I know, but I've stood on bridges in storms. I'm not afraid of wind." When I hung up, a cupboard door slammed downstairs. I stepped onto the porch and stared at the dark pines outside. Lydia once said, "People lose themselves the moment they start counting kindness as money." I wrote a few more lines. HELOC 95,000, Feb 2023, PNW Bank, motive established, Reed to file within 48 hours. Beneath it I added, storm forming. The room light flickered, then steadied. I looked up and smiled wearily, not out of fear, but because I knew the structure had reached its limit. I closed the notebook and turned off the light, leaving only the warm glow over Lydia's photograph. She was still smiling in the frame, as if she knew everything was unfolding on schedule, every number, every crack, every piece of evidence, leading to the moment I would teach my son one last lesson about structure. Not the structure of steel or concrete, but the structure of justice. 3 days later, when Reed called back, His tone had changed. Lower, sharper. "Martin, I've reviewed the bank records. They owe Pacific Northwest Bank $7,050 in overdue payments. If it isn't paid within 90 days, the bank will start foreclosure proceedings." I listened, disbelieving but not surprised. "They used the house for a loan, and then charged me rent." "Not just that," Reed continued. "Their payment amounts match exactly what they demanded from you. 1,400, then 1,700. They were using you as a monthly revenue stream to keep the loan alive?" I said nothing, a chill spreading through my chest. Every number I'd calculated, every excuse they'd given, now aligned into one clean line: desperation. Not blind greed, but calculated desperation. "I need confirmation from the bank," I said. "I'm requesting a copy of the delinquency notice. Meanwhile, get a witness statement and a property appraisal. I want our case fully fortified before filing." "I'll handle it right away." That afternoon, I visited Ruth Delaney, my neighbor across the fence, a small yellow house with geraniums on the windowsill. When she saw me, she smiled, though concern flickered in her eyes. "You've been quiet lately, Martin. Everything all right?" "I'm trying to keep it that way," I said softly. "Do you remember who bought this house back in 2011? "Of course," she replied immediately. "You did. I remember you showing me a box of savings, saying, 'It's done, not a dime owed to anyone.'" I nodded. "Would you be willing to write that down, signed, dated, as a statement?" Ruth understood instantly. "I will. And Martin, if you need me in court, I'll be there." "I know," I smiled. "Thank you." That evening, I called the appraiser Reed had recommended, a quiet man named Michael Torres, 30 years in the business. He arrived punctually the next morning, carrying a laser measure and a camera. "No need to explain anything," he said. "Just let me work. You've kept this house well. Floors, roof, plumbing. Few care for a place like you do." I simply replied, "I have my reasons." 2 hours later he left, promising to send his report in 3 days. I stood in the doorway watching him go, feeling something unfamiliar, a mix of bitterness and a cold, methodical calm. That night, when I came home, Andrew and Paige were speaking softly in the living room. They fell silent the moment I entered. Paige closed her laptop. Andrew fumbled with the TV remote. "Someone came by today," I said evenly, "to see the house." Paige looked up, wary. "See the house?" "Yes, for appraisal. I want to know its real value." Andrew forced a laugh. "Planning to sell, Dad?" "Just making sure I understand what I actually bought." The room went still. The words dropped like a stone into deep water. No ripples, just descent. I went upstairs without looking back. 3 days later, the appraisal arrived by email. Current market value, $520,000. I forwarded it to Reed with scans of the loan record and Ruth's signed statement. In the note, I wrote one simple line: "They're using debt to hold what they never truly owned." The next morning, Reed called again. "Excellent work, Martin. The final piece fits. I'll file the constructive trust complaint with Lane County Court on Monday. Are you ready?" "I'm ready." "And Martin," he said slowly, "start securing your documents. I doubt they'll stay quiet." That evening, when I returned home, there was an envelope on the dining table, no sender listed. Inside was a single printed line: "If you don't pay, don't expect to stay." No signature, none needed. I folded it neatly, slipped it into my notebook, and wrote the date and time received. Then I took out the file box, organized each document, clipped in the new copies, and sealed everything inside a waterproof bag. When done, I placed the box in my car trunk and locked it. That night, I didn't sleep. From downstairs came slow footsteps, then silence. The refrigerator door opened and closed. A phone was dialed quickly. I didn't move. I just sat in my chair, listening to every sound in the dark like notes of a song I already knew. hurried, disjointed, frightened. Near midnight, I opened my notebook and wrote the final line. March 21st. Evidence complete. Attorney filing soon. They're beginning to panic. Then I looked out the window. Moonlight spread across the roof tiles, each one pale, cold, but unbroken. And I understood. Justice doesn't need noise. It only needs weight. Enough to make liars collapse under their own structure. Monday morning, Reed called me at 8. I just filed the complaint with Lane County Court, he said. The case is officially active. They'll be served within 48 hours. I went silent for a few seconds. Even though I had braced myself, I could feel my heartbeat slow, part fear, mostly relief. Finally, my weeks of quiet had taken the shape of action. Around noon, I stopped by Ruth's house to collect her original statement. She was sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, the air filled with the scent of lavender from her small garden. I have this ready for you, she said, handing me a page tucked inside a plastic sleeve. I opened it. Her handwriting was neat, each line clear. I, Ruth Delaney, confirm that Mr. Martin Keller purchased the property at 742 Willamette Drive in March 2011 with his own funds. I witnessed his move-in and have known him to live there continuously since, maintaining the property at his own expense. At the bottom were her signature and a notary seal. I looked up, my throat tightening. Thank you, Ruth. You know this might upset them. Martin, she said gently, you've been my neighbor for 14 years. I've seen you paint the fence, replace the roof, and teach your son how to cut wood. This is the truth. Truth doesn't scare people. Only liars fear it. She placed a hand on my shoulder and lowered her voice. Yesterday I saw them arguing in the yard. I think they know you hired a lawyer. I'm sure they do, I replied softly. But I've no reason to hide anymore. Back home, I slid Ruth's statement into my file and checked my email. The appraisal from Michael Torres had arrived. Current market value, $520,000. I read every line of his notes. Roof condition, excellent. Foundation, solid. Maintenance, above average. I realized I was smiling for the first time in weeks, perhaps because someone besides me finally recognized the true worth of this house. I printed the report and brought it to Reed's office that afternoon. He stood by the window, phone in hand, looking down at the street. When he saw me, he hung up immediately. The court accepted our filing, he said. We have a case number. I handed him the appraisal and Ruth's statement. He reviewed them, nodding steadily. Perfect. These two complete the record. They can't deny ownership now. I'll attach them to the bank documents and the original check. How soon before they're served? 48 hours at most. They'll have to sign for it. I want you calm when that happens. It won't be easy. I nodded. Mr. Reed, I've worked through many load tests. There's always a first crack before silence. And after silence comes results, he said quietly. When I left his office, Eugene was draped in pale sunlight. I walked slowly along the street, wind stirring the old trees, leaves falling one by one. On the sidewalk, a few students biked past, their tires whispering on the pavement. I remembered Lydia's words. Justice doesn't have to be fast, only steady. When I got home, Andrew's car was parked in the driveway. I stepped inside and heard them in the kitchen. Paige's voice was sharp. What did you tell them? How did the lawyer get our bank records? I don't know. Maybe he had copies, Andrew snapped back. We have to do something, Andrew. If he wins, we lose everything. House, money, all of it. I stood quietly at the doorway, listening to every word, then pushed it open and said evenly, Don't worry. I don't want everything. I just want what's mine. Paige spun around. You were eavesdropping? I was listening to the truth. I looked straight at Andrew. Tomorrow when you're served, read it carefully. Everything inside is evidence, not emotion. Andrew blinked fast, speechless. Paige's breathing quickened, her lips trembling. You're tearing this family apart. No, I said. I'm fixing it. I went upstairs, leaving behind a silence stretched tight as a wire. In my room, I opened my notebook and wrote, March 24th, Ruth signed and notarized. Michael Torres submitted an appraisal of $520,000. Reed filed a complaint. They know, beginning to panic. I sat for a long while, watching the sunset cast a pale orange glow across the western wall. In that light, the shadows of trees fell like unspoken lines of text. I closed my eyes, listening to the soft wind outside, and realized that even silence has its own rhythm, the rhythm of someone preparing to witness justice begin to move. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. No dreams, no startle, only the clear sense that, slow as it may be, truth had begun to shift, and was finally making its way toward the light. Wednesday morning, I was brewing coffee when a heavy knock shook the porcelain cup on the table. Through the frosted glass, I saw a man in a black jacket holding an envelope. "Mr. Keller?" he asked. "I'm a process server for the Lane County Court. I have documents for Mr. Andrew Keller and Mrs. Paige Keller." I nodded. "They're inside." The man stepped onto the porch and knocked again, louder this time. When Andrew opened the door, his face tightened as soon as he saw the badge. "Mr. Andrew Keller." "Yes. This is a summons. You've been served." Paige appeared behind him, still in her robe. When the man handed her the second envelope, she asked, "What is this about?" "A civil claim regarding property ownership. Case number 25-1317, filed by Mr. Martin Keller." She turned to me, her face pale. "You actually did it?" "I only did what was necessary." The server signed his log, nodded, and left. The door closed and silence filled the house, broken only by wind brushing the eaves. Paige crushed the envelope in her hand, paper wrinkling. "You're suing your own son." "I'm not suing anyone," I said slowly. "I'm reclaiming my name." Andrew tore open his envelope and read quickly, his expression shifting line by line. "You're accusing me of property theft? Dad, you can't be serious. I've lived here 15 years. "No, you've stayed here 15 years. The words cut clean. Paige inhaled sharply, her voice rising. "You're destroying this family over some old man's pride?" I looked straight at her. "Pride was what you took from me when you sent the first rent invoice. What's left is principle." Andrew stepped closer, face flushed. "You know this could cost me my job, right? My company won't keep someone involved in litigation." "I'm not asking you to lose anything except what was never yours." He stood trembling. Paige tugged at his arm, her voice low but bitter. "Don't talk to him. Let our lawyer handle it. We'll countersue." I nodded. Calm. "Good. In court, at least every word gets recorded." I went upstairs and closed my door. My heart was pounding, but steady. Not fear, but the adrenaline of a man who knew he'd just unlocked a sequence that could never be reversed. Around noon, Reed called. "They've been served, I assume?" "Just this morning." "Good. They have 30 days to respond. I'll prepare a supplemental affidavit. We have witnesses and documents. Just stay calm and hold the originals tight." "They're in my bank safe deposit box." "Perfect. Now's the time they'll lose balance. Don't let them drag you into personal fights." That afternoon, Andrew didn't go to work. I heard him shouting from the living room, likely on the phone with his lawyer. My father, has no rights. I'm the legal owner." Then quieter, angrier. "Can we countersue? Defamation? Occupancy?" I sat on the stairs, not trying to eavesdrop, but his voice carried through the open space. Paige cut in. "Tell them to add the living expenses. Say he never paid, that he's freeloading." I closed my eyes. Every word they spoke was unfiled evidence. Each sentence a new brick in the wall between us. When the call ended, I went down to the kitchen. Andrew leaned against the counter, eyes shadowed. "Dad, stop this. Please. We can talk." "I've talked," I said. "You just never listened." "Then what do you want now?" "I want the truth to carry the right name." Paige stepped forward, her voice rough with anger. "You'll regret this. You don't know how courts work. We have paperwork, witnesses." "So do I said. "And their name is Truth." I stepped out onto the porch. The afternoon sky had turned silver gray, light rain falling in thin sheets. Willamette Street was empty except for the steady sound of water dripping from the roof. I looked at the pine trees in the yard, dark and glistening. Lydia and I had planted them when we first moved in. I remembered her saying, "Trees with deep roots don't fall in the rain. They just let the storm wash the soil clean." Maybe that's what was happening to me too, being washed clean the hard way. That evening, the house was eerily quiet. Andrew and Paige skipped dinner. I heard them whispering behind their closed door, fast, anxious voices. I opened my notebook and wrote, "March 27th, summons served. They plan to countersue. Behavior, defensive, unstable. Reed advised silence." Then I closed the book and looked out the window. The streetlight reflected the rain into long streaks. Somewhere in the city, Reed was drafting the first pages of our battle. I knew from this point forward, it was no longer a family dispute. It was truth placed before the law, a public record, the final language of justice. I turned off the light and leaned back in my chair. In the dark, I heard the wall clock ticking. Steady, certain. No longer the rhythm of anxiety, but the countdown to judgment. And for the first time, I felt peace, because silence, at last, was on my side. A week after they were served, the air in the house turned strange. No more polite greetings like, "Good morning," or "Want some coffee, Dad?" We moved through the same space as three parallel lines, never touching, only brushing past now and then, to remind each other we still existed. On the 8th day, Reed texted, "Don't confront them directly. They might lose control. Stay calm and record everything." I read it while wiping the kitchen counter, sunlight reflecting off the cold glass surface. I replied with one word, "Understood." That afternoon, Andrew came home early. I heard his car in the driveway, then the front door slam. He said nothing, just went upstairs. An hour later, when I stepped onto the porch, I saw him measuring the front door frame with a tape measure. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Changing the locks," he said flatly. "Why?" He avoided my eyes. "For safety. I live here, Andrew. You're only here temporarily," he said, tightening the hinge screws. I said nothing more. I walked back to my room, a chill running down my spine. Reed's words echoed in my head. If they change locks while you're a lawful resident, that's a serious violation. I opened my notebook and wrote, April 3rd, Andrew changed the front door lock without notice. Unlawful interference with residents. I took photos and sent them to Reed. That night, the house was dark. I heard Andrew and Paige whispering in the living room. Paige's voice was tense. "Are you sure about this?" "We have to cut him off," Andrew said. "Keeping him here just makes things worse." "What about the court?" "I'll tell our lawyer he left voluntarily. No residency, no claim." I stood on the stairs, barely breathing. Each word hit the floor like metal on concrete. Cold, sharp, irretrievable. The next morning, I had a routine checkup at my old clinic. I left while the air was still wet with mist. 2 hours later, after the blood tests and blood pressure readings, I drove back. The sun was high now, pouring white light onto the street. I put my key into the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. The metal inside had changed. I went to the back door. Same result. Both locks replaced. I stood there for a long moment, not quite believing it. 10 minutes later, Andrew's car pulled into the driveway. He got out, saw the keys in my hand, and said calmly, "I replaced all the locks." "Why?" "Because you don't live here anymore." "I haven't left, Andrew. No one told me." "You sued me, Dad. You can't be both a tenant and a plaintiff. We don't want you here." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Andrew Keller, You just confirmed changing the locks while I'm a lawful resident. I'm documenting this as evidence. He shrugged. Go ahead, he said softly, then shut the door in my face. The latch clicked, a clean, final sound. I stood there listening to the metal turn solid and cold. I walked around the house, every window locked, every curtain drawn tight. No sliver of light left. I photographed each door, each window frame, each lock. Every image is saved with date, time, and GPS coordinates. Then I sat in my car and called Reed. They changed the locks, I said evenly, though my hands trembled. While you were out? Yes, I have photos, video, and audio. Good, Reed said. Bad for them, good for us. I'll file an emergency motion for injunctive relief. You'll need temporary housing tonight. I know. I drove down Highway 99 to the Sunset Motel, the same one I'd stopped at years ago on a work trip. Old building, flickering neon sign, the board reading $72 per night. The manager, a middle-aged woman, looked at me with quiet sympathy when she saw I carried only a wallet and phone. How long do you need the room? I'm not sure, I said. Maybe a few nights. No problem. Room 14's open. Hot water's good, but don't expect much from the TV. I smiled faintly. I just need quiet. The room was plain. A double bed, a frayed blanket, a window facing the parking lot. I set my bag down and sat on the edge of the bed. A strange emptiness crept in. Not sadness, but a hollow calm, as if I'd just stepped out of the part of my life I'd once thought permanent. I opened my notebook and wrote, April 4th, locks replaced, residency revoked. Temporarily staying at Sunset Motel, room 14. Contacted Reed to request an emergency court order. Then I looked around the small room. For the first few minutes, it felt foreign. But when the streetlight filtered through the blinds and spread across the wall, I realized something. Silence has a scent. The scent of old paper, repainted walls, time standing still. The scent of starting over. I smiled faintly, tired but clear. If they thought a few locks could keep me out, they hadn't understood. Those locks had only opened another door, a door leading to justice they could never shut. Monday morning, Reed called while I sat in the motel room, a paper cup of cold coffee in hand. Martin, the court approved the emergency hearing, he said. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., courtroom 3, Judge Mary Granger. Lockout case. Do I need to bring anything? I asked. Just the truth and your documents. I've printed all the photos and recordings you sent. And Martin, his voice softened, be prepared. They'll be there. I hung up and sat still for a moment. Morning light slipped through the thin curtain, dividing the small room into halves of shadow and gold. I opened my notebook and read each line I'd written. April 3rd, locks changed. April 4th, left house. Video, photos, audio. Every detail now like a steel nail holding the truth in place. The next morning, Reed met me in the courthouse hallway. He wore a gray suit, leather briefcase in hand, walking briskly but steadily. We'll start with the lockout issue, he said. If we win, the judge will order them to reopen the house and reimburse your lodging expenses. I don't need the money, I said. I just want acknowledgement that they were wrong. Exactly, Reed replied. That's something money can't buy. Courtroom 3 was small, ceiling high, with cold white light pouring in. Andrew and Paige sat at the opposite table with a young lawyer in a shiny black suit, cheaper looking than Reed's by far. Andrew kept his head down, avoiding my eyes. Paige stared directly, her gaze a mix of anger and fear. When Judge Granger entered, everyone rose. Reed began calmly, Your Honor, the defendants changed the locks while the plaintiff was still a lawful resident. We have photographic, video, and audio evidence. He presented each exhibit, the new locks, the closed doors, and timestamps visible. Then he played the audio, Andrew's voice dry and hard. I replaced all the locks. You don't live here anymore. The room fell silent, only the judge's pen scratching across paper. When Reed finished, the opposing lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this is simply a family misunderstanding. There was no formal rental agreement. Mr. Keller could return once tensions ease." Judge Granger looked up, her voice sharp. "Oregon law makes no distinction between family and contract in a lockout. If a person is barred from their residence without lawful notice, it is a violation." She paused, fixing her gaze on Andrew. "Did you issue a 30-day written notice?" Andrew bit his lip and shook his head. "Then it wasn't lawful." She signed the order with finality. "The court orders the defendants to restore the plaintiff's access to the residence within 24 hours, with police supervision if necessary. They will also reimburse temporary lodging expenses totaling $476. This action will remain part of the main property ownership record." Page inhaled sharply, whispering to her attorney. Andrew lowered his head, his hands pale and clenched. I said nothing. No triumph, no gloating, just a deep, steady quiet, the kind of silence that stands beside justice. Reed touched my shoulder as the judge left. "We've reclaimed the first ground," he said. "A small step," I replied, "but one that makes them retreat." That afternoon, a police officer accompanied me back to the house. Andrew opened the door without a word. His face looked drained, cold. I walked past him, stopping by the staircase where Lydia once kept a small lavender pot. It was dry now, only brittle stems left. I picked it up gently. "I'm just taking back what's mine," I said softly. Inside, my belongings were untouched, though drawers had been opened and papers shifted. I gathered everything and sealed it in my case. As I turned to leave, Andrew stood in the doorway, eyes red. "You won, Dad," he said hoarsely. "Happy now?" "I didn't win, Andrew," I replied quietly. "Justice did. And when justice wins, someone always learns a painful lesson." I left and returned to the motel. Rain fell over Eugene that evening. I opened the window, letting the damp air drift in. The scent of rain brought back memories. Lydia hanging laundry on the porch, young Andrew running through puddles, laughter mixing with the storm. I closed my eyes, seeing past and present layered together, one filled with laughter, the other with the sound of turning locks. My phone buzzed. A message from Reed. "Court set preliminary trial for June 12th. We have 2 months to prepare. I'll hire a financial examiner to verify the purchase funds." I replied, "Good, I'll be here, waiting for the rest." Setting the phone down, I opened my notebook and wrote, "April 7th, lockout hearing 1. The court restored residency rights. Evening rain, no longer cold." I laid the pen down and leaned back. Outside, the rain fell steadily, not the sound of loneliness anymore, but the rhythm of something beginning, the slow, certain music of justice finding its voice. 2 months after the emergency hearing, the main case officially opened. I was still living in the small room at the Sunset Motel, living simply, needing nothing but morning coffee and the notebook that grew thicker with each passing day. Reed worked quietly but relentlessly. Each week he called to update me. "The financial report is being reconciled." Then, "The bank has verified the original $330,000 cashier's check drawn from your account." Every message felt like another brick of truth being set back into place. By the end of May, Reed said, "The forensic accounting report is nearly done. The examiner is Dr. Harold Patterson, the state's certified forensic accountant. 30 years of experience. He's impartial." I asked, "When will we have it?" "Next week, and Martin, prepare yourself. If it's what I expect, this case will turn completely." Dr. Harold Patterson was no ordinary man. He was Oregon's most respected forensic accountant, with 28 years in the state auditor's office. In Portland's legal circles, they called him the numbers man, the one who could trace a dollar's origin from a single transaction. He never took a case without a court order, and every report he issued carried the weight of original evidence in state court. Judge Granger herself had appointed him. Both parties will submit all financial documents to Dr. Patterson. she'd said during the May pretrial. His report will be treated as neutral evidence, Reed told me. I met him once during a property dispute in Salem. He can't be swayed, and no one dares try. I only said, "That's enough. I want truth, not sympathy." On June 10th, Reed called me at 6 a.m., his voice sharp with energy. "The report just came in. I'm reading it. Get to my office." When I arrived, he had the 50-page report spread out on the desk, sections clipped with yellow tabs. "Here," he said, pointing to the first page. "Read the conclusion." I bent down and read the crisp, even lines. After analysis of bank statements, transfer records, repair invoices, and 12 years of property tax filings, it is concluded that all funds used to purchase the residence at 742 Willamette Drive, Eugene, Oregon, originated solely from the personal account of Mr. Martin Keller. No evidence was found indicating financial contribution by Mr. Andrew Keller toward the purchase, maintenance, or improvement of the property. All taxes and upkeep expenses between 2011 and 2023 were paid by Martin Keller. Then came the final line. From a forensic accounting standpoint, the actual and rightful financial owner of the above property is Martin Keller. Reed tapped the desk lightly. "Couldn't be clearer." I looked up at him, light glinting off his glasses. "How will they react?" "Like everyone caught in the light. First denial, then blame, then despair." "I don't want despair," I said. "Just understanding." "Understanding comes last. First comes consequence." The main trial began 2 days later, on the morning of June 12th. I wore the old suit from my working days, tight at the shoulders but pressed and clean. When I entered the courtroom, Andrew and Paige were already seated opposite. They looked different, thinner, weary, as if sleep had eluded them for weeks. Between us sat Reed, calm, his thick case file ready. When Judge Granger entered, Reed began, "Your Honor, we submit the forensic accounting report from the court-appointed examiner." He handed the documents to the clerk. "This proves the entire purchase and maintenance of the property came from my client, Mr. Martin Keller." The opposing lawyer rose to object, talking about intent to gift and family goodwill, but the judge interrupted. "No notarized deed of gift, correct?" "No, Your Honor." "Then continue." When Dr. Patterson took the stand, his presence filled the room, the quiet confidence of a man who lived among numbers. Tall, silver-haired, holding a file thicker than both attorneys combined, he spoke evenly. "I've done this for 30 years. Numbers don't lie. In this file, there is only one payer, Mr. Martin Keller." Reed asked, "Based on your review, who paid for the purchase of this property?" "Martin Keller." "Any transfer from Andrew Keller's accounts contributing to that purchase?" "None. I traced 12 years of banking history." "Any record of Andrew Keller paying taxes, insurance, or maintenance?" "No. All paid by Martin Keller." The defense lawyer interjected, "Couldn't the funds have been a gift? Do you have proof it wasn't?" Dr. Patterson adjusted his glasses, replying evenly, "There's no evidence of a gift, but there is a handwritten notation stating, 'For Andrew's start, not his ownership. If it was a gift, it was a conditional one.'" The courtroom fell silent. Judge Granger turned her gaze slowly toward Andrew. "Do you have any proof that you paid for this house?" He shook his head. "Have you paid property tax, repairs, or insurance over the past 12 years?" "No, Your Honor." Paige reached for his hand, trying to steady him. The judge folded the file and spoke clearly. "The court finds that the property at 742 Willamette Drive was purchased and maintained entirely with the plaintiff's funds. Under the principle of constructive trust, legal ownership shall be restored to Mr. Martin Keller." She paused, her tone firm. "Additionally, for unlawful lockout and eviction, the defendants will pay $12,000 in damages and penalties." I heard the scratch of her pen on paper, a small sound, but to me it was the wind easing after a long storm. Andrew rose suddenly, voice breaking. "Your Honor, this isn't fair. I only meant well. I didn't want my father. The judge cut him off sharply. You may appeal, Mr. Keller, but justice is not built on good intentions. It's built on truth. I said nothing. When it was over, Reed put a hand on my shoulder. We won, he said quietly. I nodded, looking out the courtroom window, where pale sunlight hit the street. No, Sam, I said. Truth won. I just stood beside it. That afternoon, I walked out of the courthouse. On the steps, Andrew and Paige were speaking with their lawyer, faces drawn tight. I stopped briefly. Andrew looked up. Our eyes met. There was no hatred left, only emptiness. I gave a small nod and kept walking. Back at the motel, I sat at the familiar table and opened my notebook. My hand trembled as I wrote, but the words were steady. June 12th, court restored ownership. They were silent. So was I. Justice spoke. I set the pen down and leaned back. The sky over Eugene was unusually blue. A sparrow landed on the railing outside, tilting its head toward me before flying off. I watched it go, smiling faintly. For the first time in 14 years, I realized I had nothing left to prove. 3 weeks after the ruling, Eugene was deep in summer. Light spilled across the streets, touching rooftops, filling corners that had once been shadowed. I packed my things from the Sunset Motel on a quiet morning, returned the key, and signed the final receipt. The manager smiled. Heading home? I nodded. Yes, home for real. The court had ordered the transfer of ownership. The Lane County recorder confirmed that the quitclaim deed had been signed, sealed, and recorded. I saw my name on the third line of the certificate. Owner of record, Martin Keller. 6 words, yet they felt like 60 years of life restored. That afternoon, Reed and I went to the bank to settle the $95,000 loan, the remaining $80,000 still unpaid on the home equity line Andrew had taken. I want to close this clean, I said, so justice doesn't carry the smell of revenge. The banker asked, Are you sure you want to pay it all? This debt isn't yours. I know, I said, but if debt remains, the house isn't truly free. She smiled and printed the receipt. Account closed. The property is debt-free. 3 days later, a moving truck stopped in front of the house. Andrew and Paige stepped out, looking different. No confidence left, only fatigue and resignation. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching in silence as they packed their things. Reed stood beside me and whispered, Let them work. No need to speak. When Andrew carried out the last box, he paused. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know it would come to this. I looked at him calmly. You know, Andrew, in engineering, when the foundation is wrong, the higher you build, the faster it collapses. Life's no different. I just regret not teaching you that sooner. He lowered his head. Paige stood behind him, gripping his shoulder, eyes red. We'll go now. I wish you peace. I always wished that for both of you, I said, and meant it. When their truck rolled down Willamette Drive, the dust rose like a thin veil. I stood, walked to the door. The oak's surface still bore scratches where the new lock had been forced in. I touched it. The cold metal slowly warmed under my palm. What I felt wasn't joy, just peace. Inside, the house was quiet. The scent of old paint, wood, and dried lavender, Lydia's favorite, filled the air. I went to the living room wall where Andrew once hung a House Rules sign. Now, only small nail holes remained. I took Lydia's framed photo from the box and placed it there. She was smiling, the kind of smile that comes after a storm. That night, I opened every window. The cool Eugene air drifted in, carrying pine and lilac. I sat at the dining table, the same place where that first fateful lunch had unfolded, and opened my notebook. The final page, I wrote July 2nd, house at peace. All debts cleared. They left. I stayed. No one wins. Only time and justice remain standing. Reed stopped by one evening. He sat on the porch, looked around, and smiled. Quiet, like nothing ever happened. Everything happened, I said. It's just finished now. What will you do next? Maybe reopen the small wood shop in the garage, build a few tables, donate them to the church. You're not filing for more damages. You're still owed money. I don't need more. The court already gave what I came for. Before leaving, Reed turned at the door. What if they come back? I smiled. This door only opens for those who know how to knock. He laughed softly, nodded, and left. That night, I stood alone in the backyard. The wind carried the scent of lavender and the hum of crickets. I looked up at the second floor, the room once claimed as their office. Now it was my reading room. The light from its window glowed warm against the dark. I thought of Lydia, of 43 years of work, of those nights at the motel, of the papers Reed had laid before the judge, all threads stitched back into a life I thought had unraveled. I whispered, not sure to whom, "Thank you for not letting justice arrive too late." The next morning, I woke early, brewed coffee, and opened the front door. Mist rolled in as the sun rose above the trees. I set my cup on the wooden table and looked out at the quiet yard. Birds sang into the warming air. I breathed, lightly, for the first time in years. On the table, my notebook lay open, one last line blank. I picked up the pen and wrote, "And perhaps Lydia is smiling somewhere, seeing that I finally kept the home for myself." Justice is not revenge. It's the quiet after the storm. I closed the notebook, set it beside my coffee. Outside, the sunlight had filled everything. Someone once said, justice always arrives with a judge's gavel. But I've learned, sometimes justice doesn't knock. It simply stands there, silent, until truth clears its path. I never sought revenge. I only reclaimed what was mine, through silence, record-keeping, and waiting for the right moment for truth to speak. If this story reminds you of someone, a person who once endured quietly, someone betrayed in their own home, share this video with them. Maybe that's the reminder they need. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell me where you're listening from. Because somewhere in your own city, there may be another father, another mother, still searching for their justice.